Greetings and thanks for joining me. I sincerely value your time in watching this video, and if you find any meaning in what I'm about to share, subscribing to the channel would genuinely make a difference to me. Let's jump straight into today's story. My name is Darren, and I'm here to recount how my marriage came undone, a painful unraveling caused by what seemed like a harmless social media challenge. It was the facade for a betrayal that ended not only my wife's career, but also our relationship and the trust I once had in her. When Vanessa and I exchanged vows back in 2018, the possibility of infidelity never once crossed my mind. We were both approaching our 30s, fully invested in our futures, and excited about the path we were paving together. I was leading software development teams, while she was swiftly climbing the ladder in a well-established tech company's marketing division. We had dependable careers, a comfortable home, and what appeared to be boundless opportunities ahead of us. Those early days were everything I hoped for. We prioritized each other with regular date nights, took impromptu weekend getaways, and our connection felt effortless. Vanessa had a brilliant sense of humor, a kind heart, and a real joy for simply being with me. It felt like we were building something truly lasting, but as we neared the 4-year mark, the energy between us began to settle. The intensity that marked our first years had mellowed, though I never saw that as a red flag. Life was getting fuller. We had new roles, added pressures, and were transitioning into what I believed was a more mature, grounded phase of love. It wasn't about grand gestures anymore, but about consistency, shared goals, and daily support. I assumed we were both content with that progression. Vanessa gave no signs of dissatisfaction either. Our ambitions were aligned. We both wanted to make the most of our professional peaks. That was also the time when Vanessa's schedule started stretching later and later. She'd always been motivated, but her return home kept creeping past 8 p.m. Most nights, she'd barely touch her plate, eyes glued to her phone before turning in early. Saturdays blurred into weekday chaos as she handled tasks she claimed couldn't wait. To me, it made sense. She had just been promoted to marketing director. It meant added stress, more meetings, and greater responsibility. I chose to be her anchor through it all. I'd listen when she vented, offer to massage her shoulders when she looked worn out, and give her space when she needed to unplug. Our intimacy, however, began to suffer. Vanessa often seemed too exhausted, too distracted, or simply unavailable. What was once natural and spontaneous turned into an afterthought, then vanished entirely. I chalked it up to aging, career burnout, and the strain of modern life. We were in our 30s, no longer in the honeymoon phase, but in the trenches of building something real. I believed once the dust settled at her job, things between us would realign, and we could begin thinking seriously about starting a family. But what I hadn't yet realized was that her disconnection wasn't just about work. Vanessa had already begun to check out of the marriage emotionally. The red flags had been there all along. I just didn't recognize them until I was standing in the wreckage. The turning point came around our 6th anniversary. I decided to put effort into celebrating it properly, a chance to reconnect even briefly. I made her favorite dinner, lit candles, and arranged everything so she'd walk into a warm, romantic evening. I texted her at 6, hinting at a surprise and hoping she'd come home a little earlier. She replied sweetly, sent heart emojis, and said she was excited. But then 7 o'clock passed, then 8 o'clock, and there was still no sign of her. When I checked in, she said she was stuck at work finishing up a major presentation, but she'd head home soon. By 8:30, dinner was cold, the candles nearly burnt out. I tried calling, no response. Finally, at 9:30, she messaged again, saying the meeting was running long and apologized. She eventually arrived just past 10 p.m., looking drained and still carrying her laptop. I hoped she'd sit down and eat with me. Instead, she grabbed a yogurt, said she was too tired to enjoy the meal, and assured me we could celebrate another day. She went straight to the bathroom, showered, and went to bed. I remained at that table, surrounded by melted wax and untouched plates, feeling something inside me collapse. This wasn't just another busy work day. This was a conscious decision not to show up, not just physically, but emotionally. And when she finally did return, she couldn't even pretend to appreciate what I'd tried to do for us. I wanted to confront her right then, to let the hurt and frustration spill out, but I held back. I knew that if I opened my mouth, my anger might say things I'd regret forever. 3 days later, I approached the subject carefully. I told her I felt a growing distance between us, that the intimacy had vanished, and we were no longer partners, just two people occupying the same space. I brought up the anniversary night, how much it had stung, and how it felt like everything in her life came before us. She shrugged it off. According to Vanessa, I was reading too much into things. She said it was natural for relationships to go through slower periods, and I was expecting too much. Her absence, she claimed, was just part of the job, and we could always celebrate another time. What crushed me wasn't her explanation. It was her indifference. There was no empathy, no attempt to understand where I was coming from. She didn't even argue. She dismissed the conversation entirely, like none of it held any weight. From then on, the cracks widened. Vanessa stayed at the office later than ever, determined to climb even higher. She brought work home every evening, answered texts during dinner, and treated weekend emergencies like business as usual. Even the few quiet hours we had were interrupted by the relentless buzzing of her phone. Physical affection dwindled to the point of near non-existence. If it happened at all, it felt forced, mechanical, rather than emotional. The laughter, the shared glances, the private jokes that once stitched us together had all faded. I tried to adapt, throwing myself deeper into my own career. I worked late, traveled more, said yes to every assignment that took me away. If she had chosen to put work before us, maybe I should do the same, I reasoned. But all it did was increase the silence. We weren't a couple anymore. We were strangers living under the same roof, pretending that what we had still existed. Several months later, I reached a point where silence was no longer bearable. I finally confided in an old friend about the growing unease I felt in my marriage. He had been a consistent presence in my life for years, level-headed, sincere, and someone whose perspective I trusted, especially when it came to personal matters. He listened without interrupting as I laid everything on the table. When I was finished, he began asking pointed, thoughtful questions about the changes I'd noticed in Vanessa. He wanted to know if her longer hours had started gradually or appeared suddenly, whether I had any concrete knowledge about the work she claimed was keeping her so busy, and if I'd picked up on any noticeable shifts in her routine or demeanor. As I answered, his expression grew more serious. He recounted a painful experience of his own, how a former girlfriend had behaved similarly, only for him to discover later that she'd been seeing someone else. From his perspective, such behavioral patterns often hinted at things the other partner had no idea were going on. He suggested, gently but firmly, that I consider hiring a private investigator to find out what was really happening. The idea left me uneasy. It felt like a violation of trust, a line I'd never imagined crossing. I wasn't someone who pried or made baseless accusations. Still, the thought stayed with me. I wrestled with the decision for weeks. What finally pushed me over the edge was a particularly odd sequence of events. One Thursday, Vanessa claimed to have a client dinner that lasted until nearly midnight. The following evening, she said there was an emergency planning session that went late again, this time past 9. But when I asked for details, her answers were evasive and riddled with contradictions. She couldn't recall the names of the clients or explain why the meetings were so urgent. That was the moment I reached out to a professional. The investigator I hired was straightforward and methodical. He laid out the process, explaining what I could expect in terms of timelines, expenses, and legal boundaries. Most investigations, he said, were resolved in 4 to 6 weeks, depending on how often the subject changed routines or how discreet they were. The weeks that followed were among the most emotionally exhausting of my life. During that time, I began noticing things I had previously dismissed. The way she constantly checked her phone, how animated she sounded when discussing work functions, the extra effort she put into getting ready for specific meetings. Ironically, Vanessa seemed more upbeat than usual. If I hadn't already had doubts, I might have believed she was simply excelling at her job. Then, in the middle of December, the investigator called to report his findings. Over a 6-week period, he had collected undeniable proof that Vanessa was involved in an ongoing affair with the company's sales director. He had photographs of the two dining at upscale restaurants, entering hotels together, and meeting at places that had no connection to her work. He also managed to obtain financial records showing that many of these so-called work dinners were, in reality, personal outings, often charged to the company account. By that point, it was apparent this wasn't something new. Vanessa had likely been seeing this man for quite some time, using her job as a cover. The late nights, the sudden meetings, the constant texting, it was all part of a fabricated narrative. The investigator also discovered that the man she was seeing had recently finalized a messy divorce. From what he gathered, they had bonded over their respective relationship struggles, and what started as emotional support had evolved into something far more intimate. After receiving the full report, I spent 3 days just sitting with the information, unsure of how or whether to confront her. It was difficult to grasp that someone I'd trusted implicitly for 6 years had been living a double life behind my back. When I finally decided to confront Vanessa, I waited until later that night. After she got out of the shower, I asked her to join me in the living room. I spoke calmly but directly, asking her why she felt the need to betray me. She froze, caught completely off guard, and didn't respond at first. Then came denial. She claimed she had no idea what I was talking about and swore she would never cheat. But she must have sensed that I wasn't bluffing, because her tone began to shift. Her voice trembled as she began speaking about the pressure she'd been under at work, insisting that I didn't understand how much stress she was dealing with. I told her I had proof. At first, she accused me of inventing stories, but then I placed the photographs and documentation in front of her. Her reaction was immediate. Her expression crumbled. Still, instead of coming clean, Vanessa offered an explanation so outlandish it stunned me into silence. She claimed the affair had been part of some bizarre relationship experiment she'd discovered on TikTok. The premise, she said, was to pull away from your partner and see if they cared enough to fight for the relationship. According to her, spending time with her colleague was her way of testing how much I noticed or cared. She framed the whole thing as a misguided effort to evaluate the strength of our marriage. She even claimed the other man had merely helped her gain perspective. At that moment, it became clear that she would say anything, absolutely anything, to escape accountability. The fact that she could excuse her betrayal by blaming a viral challenge was somehow even more insulting than the affair itself. I didn't hesitate. I told her I was filing for divorce. She collapsed into tears, begging for another chance, vowing to cut all ties with the other man and recommit to our relationship. She insisted that the experience had made her realize how much she truly loved me. But the damage was irreversible. Trust doesn't survive that kind of deceit. And if she had been capable of maintaining a lie of that magnitude for so long, I had no way of knowing what else she'd hidden. Even if her excuse had held a grain of truth, the lack of maturity and fundamental respect in her actions left no room for reconciliation. The next day, I reached out to a divorce lawyer and began the process of ending our marriage. In the weeks that followed, her behavior swung wildly between desperation and anger. Some days she was pleading, other days furious that I wouldn't consider giving us another shot. Even when the divorce papers were finalized, I found it difficult to hand them over. Despite everything, a part of me still loved the woman I had spent years with. Ending it felt like surrendering something deeply personal, even though I knew the fault wasn't mine. But every time I entertained the possibility of forgiveness, I remembered the months of deception. Eventually, I gave her the documents. She broke down again, insisting that what we had meant more than anything she had with the other man. She promised to walk away from him completely, said she'd sacrifice anything to rebuild what we had. But her words carried no weight anymore. Too much had already been lost. I didn't seek revenge, only closure and peace. In the end, we avoided a drawn-out legal battle. Neither of us pursued spousal support. We split our savings, sold the apartment, and ended things with relatively little conflict in court. But Vanessa didn't walk away without consequences. Her affair with a colleague didn't stay private for long, and in the corporate world, rumors spread quickly. It was common knowledge within the company that their relationship extended beyond the professional, and it didn't take long for human resources to open an inquiry to determine if corporate policies had been broken. Vanessa's unease grew as she worried about the consequences, both for her career trajectory and her personal reputation. The company enforced strict rules forbidding romantic relationships among senior executives, and she knew that being involved with another director could bring their professional lives to a sudden end. To protect herself, she tried to frame the relationship as a passing, insignificant fling, but too many colleagues had already observed their closeness for that explanation to be convincing. As the review progressed, investigators discovered repeated violations that went far beyond personal indiscretion. Company resources were being misapplied to sustain the affair. Dinners classified as business expenses that were in fact private outings, meeting spaces used for personal encounters, and work-related travel schedules manipulated to allow for leisure together. In time, a formal investigation was initiated, focusing specifically on Vanessa's conduct and her connection with the other director. The findings were damning. Consistent misuse of company funds and facilities to maintain their relationship. Both were dismissed for breaching ethical guidelines and misappropriating resources, their employment records permanently scarred in ways that would hinder them from obtaining comparable positions in the future. Left with no alternative, Vanessa transitioned into freelance work, sacrificing not only her steady salary and health benefits, but also the career progression she had invested years into building. The promotion she had once been close to securing was gone, replaced with the challenge of reconstructing her professional path while carrying the burden of a compromised reputation. Her partner in the affair faced consequences just as severe. Already reeling from the financial aftermath of a divorce, losing his role as sales director stripped him of the stability he relied on, forcing a drastic change in lifestyle. What had once been a secretive romance charged with excitement had unraveled into a devastating personal and professional collapse. Nearly a year after it all fell apart, I remain uncertain about Vanessa's explanation involving some supposed TikTok marriage challenge. I still haven't come across any sign that such a trend ever existed. Though admittedly, I don't spend much time looking into relationship gimmicks on social media. Regardless, whether her story was based in truth or entirely fabricated has become irrelevant. What does matter is the fact that she made a deliberate choice to deceive me for months instead of addressing our problems honestly. She risked her marriage, her position, and her standing in the industry for an affair that ultimately left both parties ruined. The experience forced me to confront just how far some people will go to avoid accountability. Her claim about a marriage challenge was nothing more than another attempt to place the blame on me, to imply that if I had been more attentive, more affectionate, or somehow more deserving, she wouldn't have sought someone else. But I see it differently now. Our marriage didn't collapse because of my shortcomings. It ended because she decided to escape her dissatisfaction by choosing another person instead of facing the issues with me. That decision says everything about her character, and nothing about my worth as a partner. More than anything, I've realized that real love doesn't rely on fabricated tests or contrived challenges. True commitment means confronting hardships together, not creating unnecessary turmoil to measure devotion. What Vanessa did wasn't a trial of our bond. It was the final act that ended it. And with that, this chapter of the story closes. I'd welcome your reflections in the comments. Thank you for listening, and if this account resonated with you, I encourage you to explore the other stories shared on this channel. Until next time.